My name is Matina Trucci from Mateen Comedy. Question 1. What was it like your first time on stage? My first time on stage was in a small place in LA called Valley Village, which is close to Studio City, I think, and towards North LA. And so it was a 3-minute spot. And the way it worked is you had to spend $5 at a coffee and bagel place, and they gave you a raffle ticket that you could exchange for $5 worth of food, and that's how you got your spot. And so I had to wait approximately, I don't remember exactly the time, but about 8 hours, maybe 6 hours for a spot. And I waited at the laundromat next door, and I was waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. Finally, I went up on stage while people were coming in and out of the coffee shop, and comedians were the only people in the audience. It was 3 minutes. I couldn't do all 3 minutes. I couldn't get the mic out of the stand, and I think I got one, ha, or something like that, and then I was hooked. And I went home, and it felt like a rush. That's question 1. Question 2. What do you love about stand-up comedy? I love the feeling of making people laugh. It's the best natural high that I've ever had when you have a great show and you make people laugh, and when people talk to you after the show and they said that they really, really, really enjoyed it. It's also a great way for me to connect with people in some, and this might sound odd, but in a way that's maybe harder to do one-on-one, that you can connect with people, 40, 50, 100 people in a crowd, and it's the feeling. I mean, it's like, I think anything else people become addicted to or love, it's the feeling of it. So, what is one of the worst shows you've had? Well, some of the worst shows I've had typically are gonna be at a bar, or where people don't know that there's a comedy show, and where there's a sports team or some kind of game on TV, and they're not there for comedy. So as you're trying to talk to them about doing stand-up and all the things that you're doing, and where I'm talking to them about being Kurdish and ethnicity and impressions of my dad, they're not interested in that. They want to watch the game, and throughout it, they become a little bit more upset or hostile. Bars typically can be a little bit rougher, especially when they don't know that there's a comedy show going on. So a better venue would be like at a comedy club or a place where they're expecting comedy. So those are typically better venues. There's also corporate gigs and stuff like that, and there's dinner parties can be challenging as well. If people are eating, they can't really laugh. But it's where people are expecting comedy that's typically better. Question 5, what's the writing process? So for me, the writing process is, I usually write in the morning. That's when I'm the most creative. I'll come up with the setup and punchline or things that I think is funny, and then I need to try it out on stage. Ultimately the audience decides whether or not something's funny. So there are a lot of times jokes I think are funny, I'll do on stage, and they don't work. And there are things I'll do on stage, improving or messing around, and those things will work, and I'll write those down or remember them for the next time. So that's kind of my favorite part of the writing process, but I do write every morning and try to bring something to the stage. So that's typically my writing process, is in the morning, and I'm pretty methodical about it. So I try to write every morning. It's easier for me than writing at night. Question 6, do you like to improv on stage? I do like to improv on stage. It depends on the room, depends on the audience, it depends on if there's something about the room I can talk about that the audience can connect to. I do a show down in San Marcos at the Union Co-work, which looks like a classroom. So I'll talk about that at the beginning of the show, because I'm acknowledging that the show is a little bit different, and I'm acknowledging that this is not a typical atmosphere for a comedy place, and that seems to work really well. And I'll tell them, make jokes about why they're really here, like, it's not a comedy show, but they're going to be cold calling, and that seems to work out well. But there are shows that I have improv at where they're really not into wanting to hear what I have to say outside of my material. But I would say most of the time, people do like it when you improv, and they like to know that you're into the show, that you're in the moment. So I like to improv, some comics don't. Something I like to do, but really it just depends on the show. Improving is also a good way to sometimes deal with hecklers in a fun way. And there's also something you can do within improv, which is callbacks. So you'll take something that happens maybe in the beginning of the show and then call back or repeat it.
Action.
Question 7. How has comedy changed? Well, I think what's important right now, I don't know if this has necessarily changed, but this has changed in the sense that right now it's really about how you market yourself in social media. Those are important components of comedy. I'm sure that wasn't true 20 or 30 years ago. From my understanding, in the 80s or early 80s, you could get on Johnny Carson and pretty much have a career or do the road. That's when comedy was first up and coming in the 80s, and then it started taking off in the 90s, and then now, with the way it's changed, it seems like the social media, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all those things on social media are really important in how you market yourself. So in a lot of ways, I don't want to say it's not important how funny you are, but it's really about putting butts in the seats, as they say. So people who are maybe super hilarious but bad at promoting themselves is not necessarily as attractive, I don't think, to somebody who's really good at social media and can sell tickets, because that's what makes them money. Question 8. What are your next goals in stand-up comedy? Well, right now I'm working on a 30 to 45 minute set that I'm planning on pitching to Netflix. I'm hoping in May or June, filming that in a theater and inviting people to come down and then putting that into an audition tape and then submitting that to the people at Netflix and hopefully getting on. I've also submitted to America's Got Talent. I've been on Dry Bar Comedy. My special got released about a couple of months ago. And then I have a ton of sets on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and all those different social media channels. Once I pitch that to Netflix, then I'll just continue on cranking out content on social media and seeing what other outlets I can pitch to. That's question 8. Question 9. Have you ever lived in LA? It's a good question, Pat. You know, when I first started doing stand-up comedy, the first thing I did is I moved to LA. And I thought back then, this is what I thought if Jay Leno saw you on stage and you thought you were funny, then that was it. And that is not how LA works at all. I lived in Hollywood, in LA, Encino for about 3.5 years, selling insurance like most successful comics, and did stand-up comedy there for about 3.5 years. And left because I was so good. I left. And then I had a bunch of stints where I would start and stop and start and stop and start and stop. And then I came back into it in about 2013, and I've been at it ever since. So I did live in LA. It's a city that has a lot of opportunity, but I think you need to be very focused, and I was not focused at that time. Question 9. Have you ever taken a break from stand-up comedy? That's another excellent question, Pat. You're coming up with them. You know me well. So yes, I have taken many breaks throughout stand-up comedy, and I do think that's hurt my growth. I would do stand-up for a few years, stop for a few years, start again for a few years, and stop. The latest part when I stopped was when I started my YouTube channel about 12 years ago, and then I stopped and then came back into it in 2013. And you're practically starting over when you stop. You practically start over, and then you have to start again. I think it's one of those things where you're doing okay on stage, but you're not as good as you are when you stopped. And I don't think it's necessarily like a bike, because the material becomes a little dated. And I had, maybe I had a few minutes of material, maybe 10 minutes of material coming back into it. And I had to work really, really hard to get to where I am at today. But I've not really stopped since then. So any recommendations to people who wanted to do stand-up comedy is don't stop. Question 9. Do you have any recommendations of people doing stand-up comedy? Yes. Try it, see if you like it. You got to go on stage. There's no substitute. It's going to be hard. That's just part of the journey. There's no advice anyone's going to give you, nothing anyone's going to say that's going to take the nerves out. You just got to go up on stage and do it. It is difficult. Making people laugh is hard. Writing a joke is hard. Doing it on stage. But if you do it and you love it, there's no other feeling like it. That's what it's been like for me. The recommendation I would have is write every day, perform as often as you can, and record your material, listen to your sets, hear where people laugh, And that's how you build up a set, is you record your set, listening to when people laugh, and that's the best way to build up your material. That's question 9. Let's see. Question 10. How much material do you have? Well, material is really, really hard. So when I came back in 2013, I probably had about maybe 10 minutes of material. And now I'm probably around 40 or 45 minutes of material. It's really hard to come by material. You can work on the same 5 or 10 minutes for a year. You can work on the same 5 or 10 minutes for 4 years. Just depends how often you're doing it. Now that I'm performing a lot more often, I find that the material is growing quite a bit. And I'm also including a presentation into my material, which is a little bit outside of stand-up, and it's something new that I'm trying. So that's how my material's changed over time. Question 11. Does it matter if you're dirty or clean? Well, I think it's up to you. I think you perform whatever material is true to your heart. I tend to perform clean because I enjoy performing clean. That's my style. That's what's natural to me. Some people don't find that funny. That's okay. Comedy's very subjective. You can't make everybody laugh. So for me, I like to do the material that I'm interested in. I like to do clean material, but if that's not what you like, then perform the kind of material that you like. So I like performing clean. It kind of, for me, it's a good marketing part where I can perform in front of a wide range of audience. I don't really care who's in the crowd, but that's me. Everyone's different. Some people don't find that funny, but that's just what's natural to me. So I would say the answer is perform what's natural to you. Question 12, what are some comics you like? There's a lot of stand-up comedians I like. I perform a lot with Brian April. I love watching him perform. He's hilarious. He's a local guy. I'm not sure how many people know him. Some of the more popular people out there, Brian Regan, Jim Gaffigan, Jerry Seinfeld. There's tons of popular comics. I enjoy watching stand-up comedy, and those people who get to perform in the theaters and stuff like that. I mean, it looks like a lot of fun. Those are people that I really enjoy watching. Question 13. Who did you like to watch stand-up comedy when you were younger? Funny enough, I never really watched stand-up comedy when I was younger. It was not something I wanted to pursue, not even something I thought about. I think within my group of friends, people, thought I was pretty funny, and I kind of took that to heart. And it's maybe something in the back of my head, but not something that I ever watched or indulged in. The closest I ever thought of stand-up comedy was probably Jerry Seinfeld, and the only Seinfeld I can remember watching was on a show. If I heard stand-up comedy, it was just in passing. It wasn't that much, and I wasn't that into it. But once I started doing it, that's when I started to really, really get into it and started to listening to comics. But it's not something I grew up listening to. My parents, being Kurdish refugees, didn't really know stand-up comedy, and it's not something my friends were into that much, other than what I saw on TV occasionally, whether it was through Jay Leno or, like I said, through Jerry Seinfeld through a show. Question 14, how do comedians make money? Well, I think there's a lot of ways that comedians can make money. You can make money doing the road. Just depends what kind of gig you're doing, depends how popular you are, depends how you're selling tickets. Now there's a lot of Zoom shows you can do, a lot of corporate gigs you can do. So it's all how you market yourself. It's a merchandise that you have. It's whether or not you're on TV. It's whether or not you have stand-up comedy specials. The road can be a grind depending on the type of shows you're doing. If you're doing a lot of, they call them A, B, and C rooms. A rooms are the best rooms on the road. B rooms are in the middle, and the C, like it sounds, are the worst. If you're doing a lot of B and C rooms, those can be a grind. They don't pay very well, and you're going to be staying at rooms or you're going to be staying at hotels you don't really want to stay at. But if you're playing and you're really popular and can do theaters, that would probably be a little bit easier. I think now there's a lot more options to do corporate gigs and doing Zoom shows, and those are options. I do think traveling can be a grind depending on how much traveling you're doing and being on the road and that kind of thing. So I think there's more opportunities now than there were 20 or 30 years ago. I do think producing content's a big part of that, whether it's on social media or whether it's for a TV station and stuff like that. There's a lot of need and a lot of people consuming content, and that's good if you're doing stand-up. It's question 14. Question 15, have you taken any classes? Yes, I have taken classes. I took a class at the Irvine Improv with Jeff Jenna. I took a class at the Ontario Improv. And those places are excellent places to start if you don't know where to start. You don't have to start there, but those are good places to give you a foundation and also give you a bunch of people that you guys are coming up with together and you guys can do shows with together and that you can learn from together. So I found that to be a great experience to go over the basics of writing a joke, what it's like being on stage, and the things you have to think about while you're on stage. I also took some improv classes. I took a Groundlings class, Second City class, Acme class, and those were all in LA. I found those skills to be useful on stage. Those are improv classes, and I loved them. I found them to be very, very useful. You don't have to take those classes, but I found them to be super useful. Question 16. What do they teach you in class as far as being on stage? Well, there's some basics that you need to know when you get on stage. The mic's going to be in the stand. There's bright lights. You can't really see the audience. There's a bar stool on stage. It depends who you're following. Following is a comic before you. The intros are important. All those things, every little thing is important when you're doing stand-up. Is the show going long? A typical stand-up comedy show, what they say is typical, is 80 to 90 minutes. Depends where you're going in the stand-up show. If you're going in the beginning, that could be a hard spot. If you're following a comic that hasn't done well, that could be a hard spot. So there's a lot of little nuances within the show that you've just learned over time to adapt to. But you can't control everything. All you know is when you're on stage, it's your show, it's one person. You're, for the most part, who's responsible, and you just do the best you can. For me, in the very beginning, it was hard for me to get the mic out of the stand. Then once that was done, it was more about me not pacing on stage and just having these little challenges on stage. And then every day is a little bit different. Every audience is a little bit different. But now I know what is more likely to result in a good show. Some other nuances. Typically, comedy works better at night versus the day. And typically, comedy works well when when there's a spotlight and a PA system and a stage. These are all things I've learned over time. I've performed, on the ground. I've performed outside. Loud atmosphere is not the best environment for stand-up comedy. So you want it to be in more of a controlled atmosphere. You can still have a good show in any atmosphere, but it's helpful to have it inside.
What would you say your biggest struggle on the journey to stand-up comedy was, or has been?
Well, the biggest struggle is, I think right now, I think it's changed. I think in the beginning it was writing material. That's always going to be a challenge, coming up with material, finding out what's funny, staying relevant. Finding stage time can be hard. So, putting up your own room, like I have my own room that I perform in, that can be very challenging. The other biggest challenge right now is marketing yourself. I think I'm finally pushing my content and getting it out in front of as many people as possible, because stand-up comedy is very much a marketing, I don't want to call it a marketing game, but it's super, super important. So marketing yourself is extremely important, and that's not something I really considered probably 10 years ago, or I guess when I came back into it about 9 years ago. Never really thought about that. I knew it was important, but now I know it's a critical component of doing stand-up comedy is how you market yourself. So I'm pushing myself on all the social media channels, or as many as I can that I can handle right now, and then submitting to all these different things. So writing, filming, submitting, those are all big, big important parts, especially the marketing part of it.
What would you say your biggest success has been along stand-up comedy?
So my biggest success as far as stand-up comedy right now, or one of my biggest successes, it's hard to pick one, is my Dry Bar comedy special, which came out about 2 months ago. So that put in all the years and work I did into stand-up, or a lot of it, and that was produced and shot in a professional atmosphere in Provo, Utah. They were great. They treated me great. It's a wonderful place, and it was a great experience. I flew in. I got to perform in front of a professional atmosphere with multiple cameras. And they got to release that in front of their audience, which was a wide range of people and good exposure. And that was one of the biggest successes I had doing stand-up comedy.
What are some of your favorite platforms to use for stand-up comedy?
Some of my favorite platforms to use for stand-up comedy, I really like TikTok because it's really short content. I'm doing YouTube Shorts, which is really short content. I'm looking into Instagram Reels. I mean, anything I can do where I can produce short content in less than 60 seconds for people to get a bite-sized sample, and also platforms that allow me to grow. So any of those platforms that allow me to grow, I'm gonna be a fan of, and those are the platforms that I'm looking into now. Right now, I put a lot of work into TikTok, but like I said, I'm looking into YouTube Shorts. I've released some stuff there, and also Instagram Reels. I think those components are very important, in addition to working on my set that I'm going to be pitching to Netflix as well.
What would you say your ultimate goal is for stand-up comedy?
My ultimate goal for stand-up comedy, I'd love to be performing in a theater. I'd love to have a Netflix comedy special release, and also my social media markets being so big that no matter where I perform, I can release stuff to the social media market, and they'll be able to sell tickets, or people will know that I'm performing in their town, and that'll help me sell tickets. So I can perform as often as I want, wherever I want. I can do it live. I can do it in front of I can do it live, or I can do it in front of like some kind of Zoom audience or something like that, or online. So it's me basically controlling my destiny of where I want to go, where I want to perform, performing as often as I can, and having a wide enough fan base to be able to make enough money to where I can make a living from it.